Hi, my name is Fergus Madigan. I'm posting this on behalf of the Garelochhead Community Council. It's in relation to the application for a semi-closed containment system in Loch Long. I do apologise for lack of a decent slideshow. You will have to sit some up or through some photos that I managed to put up quickly, but I can assure you it is much better than having to stare at my head for the next 5 minutes. Now, my opinion on this application has changed from objecting to supporting. The change was not driven by sales pitches nor promises or by claims. It has been driven by science and the need and recognition to protect the future of Scotland both economically and environmentally. So it's a short reasoning based on science, economics and reviewed facts as to why we should be supportive of the proposed semi-closed containment system for aquaculture farming here in Loch Long. So let's have a very quick look at salmon farming in Scotland today. It's our largest food export. We produce about 200,000 tonnes every year. It employs about 2,000 people on the farms themselves and about 10,000 in the supply chain. The industry is a well-paid one, and a third of its workforce are aged under 30. It contributes about £2 billion to the Scottish economy every year. We export to 54 different countries, our biggest export market being France. So it provides vital jobs and economic enrichment to rural communities here on the west coast of Scotland. You know, on paper, it's not really bad for an industry with a geographic footprint about half the size of Edinburgh Airport. However, it does have a pressing and inherent problem. Across the Northern Hemisphere, the growth of salmon farming has coincided with the collapse of wild salmon runs. The open net pens themselves are prolific breeding reservoirs for parasitic sea lice, so they're a lethal problem for wild salmon and sea trout. The treatments used damage our marine environment, as does the waste and uneaten food which falls straight to the sea floor. So it's an industry that needs to change, and it needs to change quickly. The Norwegians and Canadians are transitioning away from these pens and are aiming at a complete closure of open net pens by 2025. What have they chosen as an alternative? Semi-closed containment systems. Why? Because they work. No recorded fish escapes, no collapsed pens, a huge reduction in sea lice, and the lowest carbon footprint of any farmed animal in the world. Now, you may have heard the waste capture technology being deployed in this application is untested and untried. That is false and untrue. Act for Future salmon farm in Norway have been doing this successfully for a number of years and turning their waste into biofuels. Norway has some of the most stringent marine environmental legislation on the planet and are OECD ranked number 1 for sustainability. So there's nothing wrong with following the lead of Norway. Their coastline is remarkably similar to the west coast of Scotland in all aspects, and there is no reasonable argument to say this technology will not work here. Now, the application for the very same system in Loch Long allows this transition to begin here in Scotland. So to say no to it is effectively accepting the status quo, and that is open net pens and their inherent flaws. Now, the alternative put forward by the objectors is land-based systems, and I'll give you a couple of glaring reasons as to why they are not currently the answer to Scotland's needs. The first and most pressing is if salmon farming is land-based, Scotland will simply not have a salmon industry at all. They're behemoth sheds run with giant refrigeration units and pumps, and economics would dictate they need to be situated as close to the transport hubs as possible. So these things will be built in industrial estates next to Terminal 4 at Heathrow, and that is an economic fact. They are incredibly energy intensive and consume huge amounts of carbon, and they are still in their infancy in terms of the science, and there are some inescapable problems. I had a really good look at the industry model based in Florida. It's a vast industrial complex, prohibitively expensive to set up and to keep running, as is the fish they produce. $99 is the current retail price for 6 8-ounce salmon fillets produced in Florida. And when things go wrong, they go very, very wrong. In March last year, a clog filter at the farm resulted in 500 tonnes of salmon. That's about 750,000 fish dying. They rely on absolute precision of water temperature, nitrogen levels, oxygen levels and filtration to get it right. And while they may make an impact in the future, they are certainly not the present. To use Florida as some sort of benchmark as to where we should be looking is utterly wrong. And I invite anyone to have a good look at their environmental record as a state, and that may give you a good idea as to why they have chosen to build a 160-acre air-conditioned shed in the hottest state in America to farm a cool water fish. Cheap energy, lacks environmental legislation. The US engages in some very questionable farming practices and is way behind the standards legislated in the UK. Let's keep it that way. We need something that is ready to go as an alternative to open net pens, that either eliminates or goes a long way to solving the problems of open net pens, and that takes a pretty big step forward in protecting our marine environment while growing Scottish jobs and growing the iconic industry of Scottish salmon. To not have a low-carbon sustainable food source to trade on the world markets in the future would be unthinkably stupid, short-sighted and inherently dangerous. So we either do something positive for Scotland, positive for our marine environment, positive for our area and positive for our future. We support some tried and tested technology before this investment simply goes elsewhere. Let us not get swayed by conjecture and opinions that are not backed up by science. This has been passed by the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency. It is cutting-edge Norwegian technology and it's fully deserving of our support. Its very location in Loch Long would ensure it would be one of the most scrutinised and monitored projects by a vast array of environmental organisations and scientific bodies in the history of Scotland. And this will undoubtedly highlight the plastic problems and other forms of pollution we currently have in the loch, and it is my firm belief we may well end up with a cleaner, healthier loch and a healthier, more diversified local economy, and surely that is what we desperately need. So please look into this objectively, please look into it rationally and with pragmatism. Please give us your feedback and make your voice heard. These debates are often hijacked by those with an ideological opposition to farming in general, and I invite your voice, the voice of the economically active, the voice of the young, the voice of those who are silent, to be heard. I recently resigned from my role as a planning officer as I do not believe our current objection that was submitted on the 6th of December last year does not take into account all the new information that has become available, and nor does it reflect the broad views of our community. I will remain on the Community Council to deal with other projects, but I'd really like to hear your voice now. I'm happy to discuss this with anyone to show my research. I have absolutely nothing to hide. My email is planning@garelochhead.info. and my number is 073 77 567